Great. Well, let's get started. Thank you for coming to the Porter Community Meeting for November 17th, 2022. Just as a reminder, this meeting is recorded. It gets put on YouTube, and we follow our code of conduct here as well. So let's get started. Today, we wanted to talk about having a data service for Porter. And I'm just going to turn it over to Brian and Steven, because I think you two have been thinking about this quite a bit. I'll just help take notes today.
Who goes first, Steven? You or me?
You go ahead. I'm not feeling very good today, so I'm going to be kind of lurking and.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, Porter Data Service. I mean, basically, we've been working on a project, and help keep me from being too verbose here, but a project where we've been we're leveraging Porter, Argo workflows, and then putting like an API and service in front of it to actually have like a library of bundles to be able to install like a catalog. And I don't think it's a top secret or anything, but we're also in the process of integrating this with, why is the name blanking on me? Backstage IO, yes, which is another kind of aggregation of a lot of DevOps, dev services together. And so as part of this, we've been able to accomplish a significant amount using the Porter operator itself and adding the features that we needed to support some of those initial workflows. And then we've taken Argo workflows to fill in some of the gaps. And one of the gaps that we're filling there in Argo workflows is getting the outputs from an installation. And so we've in our Argo workflow set up something where we can put in an installation resource, and now it has roll-up status and everything, so we can monitor the status of that installation. And then upon completion, we can then run a Porter CLI in a pod and extract out output from it. And in our case, we're taking it and shoving it up onto a message bus to come back to an end user. And so now we're looking at kind of as the dipping the toe in the pool as to getting more things from an API in Porter is how can we get outputs out of installation, and specifically when it's done via the Porter operator.
Yeah.
That's our driving use case.
We investigated a few different ways to leverage the actual installation resource itself and where to store these outputs, and we just couldn't come up with a good solution that wasn't just text parsing on the fly.
Hacky.
and yeah, very, very hacky. The best thing we could come up with was very hacky, and we wanted to, I mean, we already have a hack in place. We don't want to replace it with another hack. We want to actually design out something that supports this use case.
And along the way, we want to be mindful of secrets as well, and getting the least permissions and having access to outputs, etc. In a previous incarnation of our service, like an end user would get links to secret stores in order to get access to their outputs. And so we're looking at behaviors like that. But Carolyn, we've been talking a little bit about it, and we're talking about gRPC as kind of an initial point for starting to have APIs in, I started thinking more about, well, what about having Porter itself having gRPC endpoints in it in order to allow, because the operator is effectively just wrapping the CLI, and then we could actually have an instance of this a gRPC server version of Porter running alongside the operator manager. But then there's a project I always go to for my templates for Golang microservices, which is I think it's pod info. I can get a link to it, but it's basically a template that I always use for Go microservices, and I was refreshing my memory there. And actually their template is really similar to our use case, where it wouldn't be embedding an API into a CLI tool, but having it so like the Porter repo built two different binaries, a server binary and a CLI binary, you know, but
Yeah.
yeah.
That's what I was going to suggest actually, but I didn't want to drive where the design was going. So I kind of wanted to see what y'all thought would work.
We had looked into like how to set up just a Porter client externally, because we were first doing this inside of our integration tests and trying to say like, well, can we just set up a Porter client inside of our integration test to talk to Porter directly, and it doesn't work very well outside of the Porter project to get from what we saw a Porter client into the like a running Porter instance. So it would probably be better to have this code live alongside the Porter CLI, where all these libraries are there.
Yeah, I would agree.
Keep the internal things internal, and
yeah. Though our code base at the moment is terrible, we don't mark anything as internal. We just warn people, if you rely on the library, there be dragons, it's gonna move. So I was curious, did you have thoughts about what the API needs to look like in order to support just outputs, right? Because that's like the immediate need. And then do you see long-term, maybe it doing more?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't dug into like just high levels fleshing out like what API endpoints would look like. I tend to start with like mirroring the CLI as much as possible for some of that.
Well, let's talk
but yeah,
about
I think it's a next step to kind of mock out, some expectations there.
Because like a couple of the commands that we have, if you're going to turn the CLI into a data service and you just wanted to not reinvent any wheels and literally just be able to reuse a whole bunch of code, we have the Porter installation outputs list, and then you give it the installation name, right? And then that'll give you everything that it generated, right? You can target a specific one. You can do installation output flag type, show, right? Installation name, whatever the output is, output name like logs or something like that. And then again, you can grab it through like JSON or YAML, that doesn't matter. Is there and then when you do this, to be clear, both of these show you the last output.
Right.
But you can actually target a specific run. And I think that's probably what you're going to want to do in the operator, because the concept of last is a moving target, right? There are other flags. I think it's just run actually, and then you can give it a run ID, and then go from there and get the output from a specific run instead of the last. Last.
Can you refresh my memory?
Sorry.
If an installation, sorry, but if you can refresh my memory, if an installation output is secret, what do we end up showing?
If it's what sensitive?
If the sensitive, sorry, yeah.
We will, if you do JSON, you actually get it back.
Then we show it.
We don't get cute about it. The UI, when you do list, will keep it short. It will truncate. And it's just trying to give you a high level, like, hey, this is what's here, what's available. But if you're trying to automate and you go through JSON, we are going to resolve it. So if it got stored in a secret store, for example, like we generated, a private key pair, we would pull it back out of the secret store and give it to you in the JSON output.
There's one use case that I think of where we would want to give back to the end user a way to query the secret store directly to have access.
So
if
what
it's
would you
sensitive.
want to query from the secret store? Are you talking about, you want the name of the secret, like the path, so you could pull it yourself?
Yeah, the path to the secret, you could pull it
Sure.
yourself. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, although I do think we can't only expose that. We need a way to say, like, to consciously say, yes, I know this is a sensitive output, and yes, I want to get the actual output, because that's been a kind of a point of contention in Terraform sometimes, is not always being able to grab some outputs that it marks as sensitive.
Yeah. Well, so you do have access to it. Like I said, you just
Yes.
need to not be using the human readable tabular format. If
Right.
you JSON or YAML, like we just resolve it and give it to you. But what we could
Porter
do
can
is
access the secrets.
value.
It can show the secrets. Yeah.
We could just tell you also where's the secret store path, you know,
Yeah,
and give
yeah.
you the path. Because the path is composed of a bit of your config, right? Because say you're using like HashiCorp Vault, you know, there may be like a prefix that's like gets you into your own organization, department, environment, whatever. And then Porter is usually just operating on like a suffix of where did we store the data. And so we can give you the full path, so you can then turn around and go right back into, you know, like Vault CLI and just pull that data out yourself. But we can give you both the value and the secret path.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an important initial target. But I got to say, like this, I think goes a long way for us. And I mean, you hit the nail on the head there of like giving back to the end user what they would need locally to run Porter to access them, directly if they have the Porter CLI installed, or go into the secret store. Both of those use cases are really valuable.
Yeah. Okay.
And I know in the past we've kind of talked about this idea of an outputs installation resource, or CRD.
Yeah.
That may or may not be necessary in a paradigm like this, but I could see something like that, because you could have it being a totally separate CRD, and so you could have totally separate RBAC associated with it, etc. But maybe that's one of the things where we might see the value along the way.
Yeah, I think that's going to be useful just from the standpoint of, you want the operator to give you a Kubernetes native experience.
Yeah.
And I feel like that just kind of goes hand in hand, but may not be something you have to do at the same time as the service. Like, depending on what people need, who's integrating with it, we may be able to deliver those two commands we were talking about as endpoints, and then incrementally go, okay, now what would the CRD look like? How would you want to be able to say, associate runs to outputs, or do you even need the concept of latest output, that kind of stuff? Because I think there's going to be a lot more design for that CRD than there is actually for the endpoint.
Yeah. And so I'll also add another point, because I was dusting the cobwebs off of some API stuff and looking at gRPC a little bit more, and a lot of what I was seeing as around like gRPC, you want to focus on that for inter microservice communication, not necessarily something that's exposed to an end user. So I'd also want to kind of just put on the table here the idea of, is the gRPC from Porter just something for Porter operator to talk to Porter? And do we look at something like REST or GraphQL as a user-facing API that potentially gives us an abstraction layer a bit to have some more flexibility in API changes over time?
Sorry, I'm sometimes just gonna be quiet because I want to make sure I really capture what
yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah. Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I've seen a lot where it's like, okay, yeah, let's do everything internally in your system, gRPC, you get good API contract consistency, that sort of thing. But then when you get out to your end user, in some cases, GraphQL makes a lot of sense because it just, it kind of allows an end user to not have to be as tightly coupled to API changes. And then REST also fits some paradigms as well, where you might want to accommodate both.
Yeah. Hey, David, I'm maybe I'm pulling this out of thin air, and I know maybe you weren't like interested in participating, but do you have experience with gRPC services?
Yes, I do. So actually, we do that a lot in the container D shims. We actually use TTRPC. That's what container D uses. It's kind of like a slimmed down version of gRPC used for just inter-process communication, like local on a local machine. So trying to trim some of the fat off gRPC.
Mm-hmm.
Any particular?
I don't have a lot of experience. I have experience with gRPC. The plugins use that to communicate. And what's kind of cool about it is the level of versioning that's supported, and kind of ensuring that people are going to be able to be successful building clients and knowing that it's going to work without a lot of like reinventing the wheel and things like that, which I really appreciate.
The contract stuff is nice. Yeah.
Yeah. At the same time, though, like I have run into feeling a little limited at times because of what you're capable of expressing, and how sometimes porters returning things that have variable shapes or just raw documents, which is it's not always easy to work with gRPC. I was just curious if the concern is we want users to be able to have a consistent way to access it. Do we have kind of two different people using this? Users who are just querying the data versus people who are integrating with Porter, and would really matter what version and kind of being locked into a specific contract. I don't know. I don't have a lot of experience with this. I'm just kind of reaching out to feel like anyone with experience with it, do you have gut feelings on potentially having two layers to the API?
I mean, it really comes down to the stability of your data contract, right? So you could just go JSON and have like unstructured objects, or I mean, how much schema do you want to get into, and how much do you actually like? How much does that impede somebody? If the schema in like say the protobuf, the actual serialization format is in a common place, and you control it, and it's you're very thoughtful about versioning and not making backwards incompatible changes, then it's not really too bad. Like, you get the structures and you don't even have to worry about it as a developer if you're using gRPC. Whereas like if you're unstructured docs, then that's kind of a free-for-all. So with structure is good, but without structure is freedom. So I don't know, whichever one.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it is possible for a server to support multiple versions of the contract at the same time, so that if we do make a change, we could have V2 and V3 servable, depending on what the client supports.
Yeah, and you can also just make those, different endpoints, like different paths, right?
Okay.
And this is where, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more academically versus my hands-on experience, because I was just kind of refreshing my memory and reading. I read like what gRPC up and running again just recently, kind of, and like when I hear about like, okay, different versions of the gRPC API, this is where if you put like a GraphQL layer for the end user, they're only querying the attributes that they need. And so when you're querying for these initial attributes based on the 1.0 version of the API, we just get to route that into the 1.0 version of the API. But as soon as they start requesting new attributes that might be coming from a new version of the API, from the end user perspective, it's just about asking for those additional attributes. And it's our burden to get them to the right version of the APIs to honor that request back. And I get the impression that that's, you know, that to me is, I like the idea of owning that burden for the end user to not have to necessarily, you know, understand which version of an API and when to go for.
Yeah.
You could
One
take
thing-
That's just my interpretation of things a little bit, not hands-on. So
you could just take Kubernetes approach. You know, think about how CRDs get transformed between version to version. You know, you have a conversion webhook that, you know, user is asking for this version of doc. You have a storage format. The storage format is chosen, and then you are able to convert from the storage format to the requested format. Following the same principles, you know, it really doesn't matter if you're using gRPC, REST, or GraphQL. It's just, hey, I use this data contract, and you control your storage format, like as the app, right?
yeah.
One thing I want to point out that isn't immediately obvious about Porter and how it stores data is that when Porter itself asks for data, it goes through the plugin system and it uses, you know, a specific format, but it's not actually querying the data directly. So like, we're not writing SQL queries ourselves or things like that. Like it goes through queries that are Mongo queries, and then those are sent to the plugin through gRPC, and then it returns the data back. And it gives the plugins the ability to put that data in a whole bunch of different data stores, essentially. So just to be clear, like if we wanted to do the smallest, thinnest thing possible, which doesn't accomplish everything we're talking about, but I just want to like highlight that if we did it in gRPC, right, we could reuse all the same messages and contracts and things that we've already hammered out for the plugins, and we wouldn't potentially need a translation between what the user is querying for and how you actually get that data out of our plugin system. If we switch to something, let's just say REST, for example, we would have to translate whatever REST is sending to something that the plugins understand and then back again. So like if we switch things, you're gonna end up with this little shim essentially to map from user queries to the data queries. So at that point, you could do things like what David was saying, like, hey, what version are we targeting? Okay, now let's reshape the data from what it was stored as to something else. It almost sounds like, I'm not familiar with GraphQL at all. Is that something where someone would integrate with GraphQL, or would that be something like a UI and someone's just ad hoc querying?
I mean, it would just be another API layer outside of everything else. Like, you know, the way I've seen it is it's intended like REST to be what is the external facing API for your service. And it allows for just a bit of an abstraction layer. But that being said, to your point, David, like I think the guiding principle is to minimize the end user's need to pay attention to API versioning over time. And ideally, it just works as new features come in. So that's our end behavior.
Okay.
I would.
So to get that, we would want a public API that's stable, right? That we pick what we want this data to look like, we commit to it and go, okay, we're eventually going to get stuff either, forwards compatible, we add new
yeah.
things, we don't remove it. And then we
And the thing with,
need
well,
to translate
that's
that
the
as
thing about-
needed
sorry.
to the storage.
And that's the thing, like with GraphQL, it's not necessarily about sticking to something that's consistent. It's the end user queries for the particular attributes of the request they want. And if they, and so over time, if there's internal functionality that changes, existing users who have just been querying on their existing attributes, they don't see any change. But then if they go in and go, you know what, I actually want this new extra piece of info that I wasn't getting historically, they just add that to the list of attributes they want coming back. And now they have that as well. And they don't know that that's a version 2 of an API to get that one attribute. And oh, the original 3 that they were getting, well, 2 of them they're still getting from the 1.0 version of the API, and 1 they're getting from the 2.0 version of the API because we silently upgraded them for them.
Yeah.
That's kind of where, that's my understanding of the GraphQL layer.
Okay. Because I don't know a ton about it. So it sounds though.
But that would, to me, would be like a beyond like an initial slice end to end. I don't think an external facing. Well, yeah, I think we can add layers as along the way.
So, but it sounds like if we talked about where we wanted to see this some point in the future, right? We'd probably have two layers. One, which is something that understands how to be that end user facing API. And that's really important. It's not for integrating with plugins or other stuff that's super tightly coupled, right? This is for someone who wants to get data out and they are not expected, like you said, to pay attention to versioning, or we rename this field, or this moved over here, or whatever. Like, it's going to shuffle the data to keep it consistent. And to handle things like, oh, we changed storage or we added new fields, and this is how you would backfill or shim that data. And then we would have another layer that just understands how to, expose the data we have in Porter.
And that could be driving like the installation output CRD, something like,
Yeah. So like as a first step, the Kubernetes operator may be using a interim public API. It's essentially just so it allows Porter to query itself and its own data.
Yeah.
And we would just expose it for a bit, but we wouldn't tell people. We'd be very clear, it's not going to be stable. Eventually, we're going to be adding something on top of it, potentially in a different product. It's not going to be gRPC that people could then integrate with.
Yeah.
Does that just kind of sum it up?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think that's a good initial target.
Okay. How are people feeling about this? Do you think this is enough to start maybe coming up with a PEP that just kind of says this is what we want it to look like, this is the endpoints, and we'll implement it, in this way? If you look at like the dependencies PEP, you can get a feel for like the amount of information. It's less technical and more just like, this is the plan,
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something Stephen and I could take a first stab at there too. So,
yeah, that'd be great.
That's the next step. You up for that, Stephen?
Yeah. I was hoping to pull this into our next little planning session.
And just to be clear, this would be for the internal data service. The user-facing one would come later. Just to limit the scope, that we don't need to, start getting pie in the sky. We can just focus on the immediate use.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is, so we had this API service that was enabling a lot of the same functionality that Porter has around like installation based, like we get these IDs and everything's message based, and but we were doing it for Terraform Enterprise because there wasn't corresponding capabilities in Terraform Enterprise for that. So, but as we're moving on to Porter, I'm starting to see like we're just mirroring Porter capabilities in our API directly. So every time we want to add new, like we want to support upgrades, now we got to have a new API endpoint that understands how to do that. And it's basically just a translation layer between REST call and a Porter operator action. And like if we can minimize the amount of work that we put into our custom API and just put that useful functionality into this Porter service, that would make it a lot more maintainable for sure.
Oh, that's interesting. I have one question. So when you have this kind of layer that translates between, API calls and getting Porter to do something, you'd mentioned like, oh, we add upgrade, now that's a whole separate endpoint. Do you explicitly do things like install, upgrade, things like that? Or do you use Porter installation apply, which kind of then relies on Porter's desired state resolution and figures out?
Well, we don't have upgrade supported yet, so that's part of the issue. Is we only have install and delete, so we're not actually, we haven't implemented the upgrade. But in terms of how I would actually go about doing it, is it would be installation apply, and
okay,
and Porter would handle all of the heavy lifting for me. But in order to get to that, we now need to add that capability to our API shim layer in order to understand like, okay, this already exists. I need to just run a new installation apply on it. Whereas like we could just bypass that shim layer altogether and just talk directly to the Porter service, or even to the way that Argo workflow works is it talks directly to the Kubernetes API and just talks in terms of Kubernetes resources. So, that's another option if we expanded some of these capabilities into the operator.
Well, I mean, the operator does this today, right? So if you make an installation resource, Porter itself, not the operator, anything, the operator just uses installation apply,
Right.
has no idea if something exists or not.
Yeah.
And then Porter just figures out the whole thing. Would you be able to just cut out having a service entirely and just operate through CRDs, or would you still need an API layer?
The thing that we need is the outputs, right? We still don't have, like, we could do a lot of this stuff now just directly through CRDs, but then we would still need to do the parsing of text strings to grab outputs. So whatever solution we go with, we need a way to actually inspect and talk to Porter directly. But we definitely could.
I'm not questioning that. I was just curious about, I just want to make sure that we were using installation apply.
Yes.
That's all.
Yeah.
It's doing a lot of heavy lifting. And
so ideally I would like to.
It's going to be behind that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would like to decrease the dependency we have on our custom APIs and leverage the operator functionality as much as possible. It's just we're kind of in this loop right now where like we're trying to get something out the door and we have a working POC. So how much do we continue to invest in that versus shift over into implementing something Porter natively? Yeah.
I mean, so that was the other thing though, is that I had called this the Porter data service, right? But it sounds like maybe we want to expose actions too. Or would it literally be, when you were thinking of being able to do things, would you be exposing Porter installation apply? Which is a data operation in Porter.
I don't see that
it triggers a bunch of stuff, but it's not really RPC.
We're kind of focusing on outputs as the initial scope of things. And if we're thinking of it from an operator POV, the installation resource gives us, we have an API for that through Kubernetes.
Yeah. Okay. I must have misunderstood what Stephen was saying about calling triggering installs or upgrades through porters.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
basically what we have is we have a lightweight service listening on an event bus that translates to creating the resources in Kubernetes or whatever. In our case, it's triggering an Argo workflow that does everything. And so, yeah, we're, just because what's exposed to our end user might look like a different paradigm, the message we get, we might need to do something to translate it into something that's, just update this existing installation resource. That's just, but it's just as easily we expose to an end user, here's your installation resource that is already installed for you, and you can choose to update to a newer version of it by just changing the reference or something like that. And
so does this sum up what you're thinking then, that the service, even long term, we're thinking it would be for data, it wouldn't be for triggering bundle execution, that would still be the domain of the operator? Okay.
That feels right to me. But
Yeah. What I was saying is, like, I would like to see us move off of our APIs and onto Kubernetes APIs directly to talk to the operator, right? Not bypass the operator's CRDs to do this stuff. Okay.
Yeah, when we do the PEP, let's just make sure this is part of the scope, just so that, I don't know, to be honest, because I'll forget in 3 months and then wonder again. If we write it down, that'll be great. Yeah. Is there anything else that people want to talk about or think we wanted to capture or think about? Or put it another way, do you need any help with getting this PEP kick-started? Is there anything we can do, or do you feel like you've got the info you need to, I know it's the holidays, start working on it at some point?
I'll look at the dependency PEP to kind of set expectations of what we're looking for out of PEP, and then I think Stephen and I can go off and huddle and come up with an initial draft and come back. So,
and
we'll ping it along the way, of course.
The dependency PEP is really long, but what I would take away from it is it just needs to contain our plan and identify breaking changes and stuff like that. And it doesn't need to be formal at all. You can just write in a normal tone of voice and just bullet point.
I can't write it and go.
I don't know. Sometimes you get in your head like, this is like an official spec or PEP or what a proposal. I've got to, talk like a professional. No, we can just get enough info that we know what we're going to.
Why start now? No.
No, exactly. It's too late for us. Okay.
Just from a general, I guess, Porter housekeeping perspective, we are starting to evangelize Porter a lot more internally, going and finding opportunities to, like the other day, Brian was snooping on the Nginx open source Slack channel and saw an interesting bundle, and
he's that too.
I saw an interesting Terraform example, and he's like, well, let me just go make that a bundle, right? And then now shared that back with them, and so we're trying to communicate Porter a lot more internally in F5, and we have got a few other teams starting to move off of just raw Terraform and onto Porter as well. Plus, we just upgraded our Artifactory instance, so I can finally test out, does Porter bundle publish work on Artifactory properly? Haven't had a chance to get back to that yet, but
let me know. I've had people confirm that as far as CNAB goes, it all works, but I always like that extra level before I tell people we support something, that even with any weirdness Porter does, it still works.
Yeah, I would be more concerned about weirdness from JFrog than Porter, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, you know what I mean. It's just, sometimes, like, especially around authentication is where I've run into the most compatibility oddities as far as like what codes they return to indicate we're unauthorized, how are insecure things handled, all sorts of stuff like that, like non-HTTPS, things like that, on self-signed certs. are all things
Artifactory,
that
they've rewritten
we spent a lot of time
services.
fixing.
Yeah, like Artifactory writes their own versions of the services from scratch, is my understanding, versus like leveraging some off the shelf kind of stuff. So,
That's
you know,
wild.
I've seen, yeah, but I had to put a link in the chat. So that was the open source Nginx. Hey, you know, people don't always realize that F5 is Nginx these days, but this was taking another engineer's work where they had already written Terraform, shell script, Ansible in order to provide like a reference example of Nginx. And I was able in a couple hours crank the bundle out, wrapping their work and showing it back to them. And we're kind of using this to kind of showcase the power of packaging your work. And then and you know, we should talk about giving a demo of our service that we've been working on. But now it's like as a bundle, now we just add it to our catalog, and we have a web UI where they can go to and just click it and deploy it and get all the outputs back and interact with it. So
yeah, I wrote this little generator that goes out and grabs the Porter bundle reference and then constructs our internal data structure just straight from that reference. So, you know, ingesting bundles is very, very quick for us to do into our system. And I think that's going to be key when we start having other people write their bundles. And then we're like, okay, that's great. Now you can run it on a managed service behind a managed cloud without you actually having to worry about, you know, cloud access and security and all that stuff.
That's super interesting. Anytime you want to demo it,
yeah, we're ready. We've been
heads
down deploying instances, but I think we're ready to give a demo of it here too as well, because we've been focused on the full DevOps pipeline of owning that service and everything too. So.
Well, part of it too is like we have a current UI in place that is F5 IP, and you know, is falls in line with our, you know, our UIs that we develop internally, and it's a lot more difficult to open source that. But the move on to Backstage is basically removes all IP out of it whatsoever. So we can just, you know, basically I would like to get to the point where it's like, here's a customization.yaml that references some GitHub repos that you can just do kubectl apply, and it'll blast out the operator, Backstage, the integration and all that, and you'll have this, you know, these two services running side by side that you can start playing around with. And it's just going to be all open source and very well integrated.
That would be amazing. And to be honest, like if you just wanted to show it, talk about it, write a blog that just says we're doing this and long term we're hoping to open source it, I mean, people would be very keen on learning more about this. I've had people asking me, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with the CNCF's artifact hub. This is where people can share common things like customize stuff, maybe things for like gateway. Obviously,
we have some stuff that we could put up there. Yeah, we have a whole customized for managing Porter operator and Argo workflows and all that. Yeah.
So one of the things I want them to support, like first-class citizen, as opposed to just pretending it's a Docker image, is Porter bundles. So that people could create a reusable bundle that understands Nginx, for example, and then we could put that
I was
up
literally
there.
about to ask that question, if there's a place we could get all this kind of stuff or pointers to from it.
Yeah, I'd love to see building blocks. You know what I mean? The kind of things where it's like everyone needs something that understands how to stand up Nginx. Everything needs to understand how to set up, you know, an F5 load balancer, to be honest, or whatever it is. You know what I mean? A database, a Redis, and getting it up there so that once we have dependencies, you have to write a lot less to get your bundle, your full application up and running, because you can just plug in a whole bunch of pre-built blocks from Artifact Hub.
I saw this. I ran into this company the other day that they're doing something similar along that lines, but specifically with Terraform modules. But they have this this thing where you can basically take modules, and it's a just a little UI data visualization tool where it's like, okay, let's get a VM, drop it into your little infrastructure map, bring a database, drop it into the infrastructure map, draw a line between the two, and it automatically creates that connection for you. And then when you're ready to run, you just click, create, and it spits out the Terraform that represents that visual architecture. And there's no reason that could not be porta bundles.
I want a WYSIWYG infrastructure that would actually run it. Don't even show me that it's Terraform. I don't want to know.
Yep. That's the whole point. That's my end goal.
Do you want to use the Scratch programming UI?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Why not? We talk about no code all the time, right?
I'm gonna air some laundry, but it was just so great when we demoed this to one of our VPs. The first thing he asked was like, "Can we get natural language processing in front of this so we could say, hey Google, deploy a Kubernetes cluster?" And I'm like, "You could, but do you want to?"
I mean, that's a great way to definitely run up your, G Cloud bill.
right. Especially if you have a parrot.
It's also a great, I guess, KubeCon demo, but that's about it.
No, it would make a great keynote for sure. The Hey Google. I've seen Kelsey Hightower give that demo, actually. Yeah.
I'll have to look.
Well,
into
I saw
that
the Terraform.
Sorry.
No,
we're literally having an internal discussion on like a cnab.f5.com.
Yeah.
That would be public facing F5 bundles. So
it'd be amazing. That'd be great.
Yeah. But the Artifact Hub would be even better, I think.
I'm really pushing
to figure out how to make that happen.
I'm really pushing to have like our solutions engineers here at F5 start, because like if you go to our F5 Dev Central, which is kind of our solutions engineering hub, there's a mixture of some code, some screenshots of UI configuration, and I would like them to just have the screenshots, have the stuff, but at the end of the day, write a porter bundle that represents this reference architecture that anyone can just one-click deploy.
Yeah.
And it's exactly in line with like what that thing that Brian did is like, here's something written by an Nginx solutions engineer that showcases what Nginx can do. And oh, by the way, it's a porter bundle, so one line install, and we have a managed cloud that you can actually demo this directly, and we have all the monitoring in place for that.
Yeah, at one point we had that up and running, reference bundle architectures for Azure, and you could just go, oh, this is what it looks like for this type of solution. And then literally from the GitHub README, there was a button. You just click and you'd say deploy to the cloud.
Exactly.
This is Azure, so we did it to Azure, but it could work with anything.
Yeah.
And it would just set
that's
use your Azure creds and go.
Yeah, and then we have very aggressive reaping policies and cost management in place for that instance that spins up. But so you get 12 hours of some F5 or Azure product that you get to play around with, and then it goes away. Yeah. And when you're ready to graduate it, that's when you bring in your credentials, your cloud, and then it just becomes a porter install.
I would imagine as soon as it's public, people would immediately start to Bitcoin mine for those 12 hours. It would be worth it.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So Mohammed, I see that you joined. I'm so glad you were able to make it, because this was your idea. I don't know if there was something in particular that you wanted to discuss about exposing Porter's data through a gRPC service. We were limiting this for the moment to just data. I wasn't sure if there was more you wanted to kind of bring up or include in the design, or maybe collaborate with Brian and Steven on this. Oh, I'm sorry, you're on mute. Oh, it's not working. I love Zoom.
Can you hear me now?
Yay! Great. Yeah, I can
Awesome.
hear you.
Yeah, a long time ago, I started thinking about this, and I had some work done. Um, the I read what you put in the comment that you said. What would be the protocol look like? The only thing I would add is to centralize the management of the protos in a central way, so we can version them and expose them in a public way. I started working with Buff. I don't know if you know this, buff.build. They have a nice API and a repository that you would expose all the protos and then referencing them later on.
Let me just, because I'm not familiar with this at all. Is this something that we would use when we generate the buffers, or is this to
Yes.
help make? Okay.
Yes. You would describe the protocols, and then you would host them and then reference them like for other clients.
Okay. Right now I'm using kind of the low level command line tools that
Yeah.
I think Google provides. Yeah.
Yes. This buff is an easy way to manage this.
I think they're proto buff tools. I kind of like put them all into one big mental bucket of like gRPC proto buff, and then I don't really think about the differences. Yeah, if there's something easier to use, I found it really difficult to work with. That would be great if we could make this not quite so hard to build out what the protocol should look like.
And especially with versioning and managing and exposing all that. So
yeah. Okay. Yeah. If you, I don't know if you've looked at what we have right now for the use of protobuf and the tools, but if you have any suggestions or you want to redo it with the buff build, feel free.
Okay.
Code was ripped out of my heart, and I never want to try to touch it again, to be honest.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I'll take a look at it.
Great.
Did you discuss the dependencies, the new strategy, or not? I'm sorry, I'm just coming back from a long stop.
Dependencies has moved along quite a bit. You may be interested in this. Have you seen the latest proposal for dependencies? It's called PEP 003.
Yeah. No, we did work on it like early with Vogan, and then yeah.
Okay.
So I
have this out if you want to take a look. And then I've been slowly doing implementations of some of this all behind a feature flag, so it's not visible in Porter at all because it doesn't work yet. But if anyone is interested in helping with that, I have it to the point where I can run a bundle with its dependencies, and it will trigger and run everything in this new way. What I'm working on right now is passing outputs from, say, for example, you install WordPress and MySQL, passing the connection string from MySQL to WordPress is the part that I'm working on right now. I've been calling that workflow, and I have an open pull request. I would love feedback on this, because I have a feeling that this workflow is going to become public. Right now it's used internally in Porter, just to represent the plan of what we're going to do when we run multiple bundles and pass data between them. But I would love feedback or thoughts, because sometimes when you write something yourself in a vacuum, it's really hard to to see problems or like where we would need to be more clever in the future. There we go.
I've done things like this where I just pulled the DAG library out of Terraform. And
This is beyond the DAG at this point. This is really focused on like, if I had a bundle, it shows a whole bunch of information about all the data necessary for Porter to run a chain of bundles unattended and pass data between them. Is what it's really focused on. It's all about like, how do we securely and just in time inject sensitive data and kind of make sure that we can pause, resume, pick up where we left off, restart, but I already have the distributed acyclic graph of what do we need to run, what's the order, all that. Like we're past that part. It's not checked in yet, but if people are interested in reviewing it, I can link people to it. They've just been sitting as like draft PRs while I work on it, because I didn't want to like commit something and then change my mind 3 weeks later. Maybe the next meeting we can talk about this.
Yes, please, because there is something else coming up. We are looking for air-gapped deployment with the, for example, we have like a main bundle with subsequent dependencies. We would like to recursively archive all the bundles, the images, and even the helms that are referencing the images that are pulled from the Docker repository. So we would have a complete bundle in air-gapped deployment. Even not only we archive the bundle themselves, but also the images, the dependent images.
Yeah.
And then restore that in our gapped environment.
Yeah, we have a big like missing part of our proposal for dependencies when it comes to air gap, and how do we make that experience, what the process you just described of getting it across the air gap and reassembling it again.
Yes. Yeah.
We don't really have a solid idea of how we want to do that. Obviously it's solvable. It's just a question of how does Porter help with that, Yeah.
Yeah.
Does the workflow, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, does the workflow as it's written now support nested workflows? So like if you have dependencies and then one of your dependencies has its own dependencies, does it resolve that?
So at the moment, workflow is a fully resolved execution plan. So maybe the word workflow, I should like bail immediately and pick a different one. So if you give Porter a single bundle and you say installation apply, okay, it will go through and look at the entire graph as deeply as it needs to go. Okay, so if you have a bundle that requires a bundle that also has dependencies, it will blow through that entire thing and then figure out what's the order that it should run. And then it identifies existing installations that can be reused and searches for the appropriate versions that match and everything. It resolves all this and it creates what I'm calling right now a workflow. Previously, I'd called it an execution plan. But if we wanted to expose this to the user, obviously they could write something that isn't fully resolved and it would need further resolution. So the answer is like, depending on if we're talking about the end user or just Porter installation apply, we do resolve the full graph.
Sure.
Right?
Okay, that makes
sense. But we don't do that resolution from the workflow resource. We assume it's already been done at that point. Yeah.
Yep, makes perfect sense.
Yep. I don't know. I was enamored with the name execution plan, and then realized maybe I was having too much fun with my old SQL days from way back when.
That's very medieval sounding too, right?
Oh goodness, I hadn't even thought about that.
Way to go dark.
Yeah. I realize we're going over, but this is great. I'm hopefully everyone can make the next meeting then, and we can just geek out the whole time on dependencies, workflow, air gap, and how we're gonna make this work. Would be great.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. This has been a really good day today. Everyone enjoy the holidays coming up.
Thanks.
All right. Talk to you later.
Thank you.